Okay.
Yep.
Recording. It's recording. It says it's recording. Okay. All right. Welcome to the show, everybody. You're supposed to say something.
I'm waiting for Steve.
I was waiting for the audience to say, "Oh yeah, thank you very much." Yeah, thank you, Neely. Okay, now I introduce myself. God, don't default to me. Okay.
No. Okay. Hold on. No, this is not how this is going. Let's start over here. Okay. Maybe I won't say welcome. I'll say, yeah, you guys can all just say thank you real quickly there, okay? And then I'll start. All right, welcome back to the show, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Neely. Excited to be here.
Cool. So this is a little bit different. I have 3 guests, and I've never had 3 guests before. So we're going to try to be as organized about this as possible. And I know that you guys have all been on the show before, and most people know who you are, but we're going to go through and have you introduce yourselves. So we'll start with Steve Bechtel. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, my name's Steve Bechtel. I live in Lander, Wyoming, and I have a climbing gym, fitness center, and I also do climbing coaching through a company called Climb Strong.
Cool. And how briefly has this pandemic affected you in your business?
Well, I thought, that we were ordered to close the gym a couple of weeks ago, and I thought that would free up a bunch of time for me, but weirdly enough, it's made me more busy with different weird jobs and trying to keep up on the digital end of things. And then also I have my kids at home now, so we're trying to do homeschooling with them, and it's given me a whole new respect for teachers. So that's
right.
cool.
Yeah. And I'm going to ask about that, how that's affected your training and, how other people in the same situation can go about continuing to train through that. Tom Randall, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name's Tom Randall, and I'm one of the co-founders of Lattice Training, which is a coaching and profiling company in the UK. And we work with climbers mostly online all over the world, and from juniors all the way through to adults. And in terms of how it's kind of affected us, it's just kind of changed the way we work with our athletes and clients, because it feels like the world has changed quite a bit in the last few weeks. So it's just ended up with this mad scrabble trying to work out how everyone trains, what they're doing, how we communicate, how we work with a team ourselves just as the staff. So it's just kind of like a giant whirlpool of every day being a bit different from the previous.
Even though a lot of your training has been online and from afar to begin with, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's very definitely a online and remote focused sort of work that we do, but because it's a fairly sizable team, it really affects the dynamics of how you work. And we have a location just outside of Sheffield where everyone is on a daily basis, and now that place is quiet. We had to, it's shut down. No one turns up there anymore. It's just a dead office there. We're all now just working off our computers from home. So it's really weird. It went actually from this amazing family feel where I felt so connected to everyone that I worked with to now this really strange, distant thing, which is we're used to with clients, but interpersonally within the team, it's really weird.
Yeah, I think a lot of people can probably relate with that. Kris Hampton, how about you? Who are you?
I am Kris Hampton. I'm with Power Company Climbing, and like Tom and Lattice, we're also a mostly remote, mostly online company that works with climbers. And for me, it really hasn't changed what we do all that much, but it did send me into this sort of make sure all my coaches are okay, make sure everybody's still making money, but also safe and that their families are good. And, we all kind of went into overdrive trying to get our clients set up with whatever they had at home to make sure everybody was going to make it through this and try to stay sane through it. Personally, it hasn't affected me all that much. I've got a home wall, so it's, you know, I work from home. I'm mostly at home and I train at home. So it hasn't affected me all that much, other than my daughter just had a baby 2 days ago and I wasn't able to go there and be there for that. So other than that, I haven't been all that affected.
Well, congrats. That's exciting, Grandpa.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Papaw. That's what I'm taking.
Papaw?
Papaw.
That's a very Southeastern thing, right?
Yes, it is.
Nice. All right. So I'm going to start throwing out questions there. And we received some questions on our Facebook group, and I'm going to use some of those. And then you guys also have some common questions that are coming through. So we're just going to try to talk about how people should be training at home, what to focus on, how to keep motivated, those kinds of things. We're just going to try to help you as much as possible. So I'm going to start with Steve, and we're going to go through everybody. And the first question I'm going to pose is, how in general should people be training at home if they're going to keep training at all, or should we keep training?
Yeah, I think lots and lots of days of max hangs on the hangboard in a row is a great idea. No, see, that's kind of where everybody's going. Because if we look at our home setups, most people may have a little set of dumbbells and a hangboard, and some of them are actually under a shelter-in-place order where they aren't supposed to be leaving the house except to go shopping, and so we really limited in that way. And so I think the most important thing is for people to think in the long term, not like I need the world's strongest fingers in the next 3 weeks. And they need to be thinking about the fact that now is an opportunity to work on things that they might not normally be able to address. And so, yeah, hangboarding is fine, but it can be really, really too much, especially if it's the only thing you're doing. And so one of the things that is widely available now are at-home body weight, circuits or workouts or whatever. And not to say that one person's version of those are better than the others, but I think within a few weeks time frame, most people are going to be very, very tired of doing, push-ups and squats and burpees. And so coming up with something that is a progressive plan and something that changes the overloads throughout the week or day by day is going to be really, really important. And we need to look on like a 3 and a 4 week phase rather than like, what am I going to do every single day to try to improve? And so I think if you can still get outside and do something, getting out and getting general activity is very useful. Most of us, if you look at the amount you've been training, maybe it's 8 hours a week. Now you're in your house and you're just thinking, I'm just going to hangboard. That's not going to get you the capacity that you need. And so continuing to get outside and go for a walk or a bike ride or a hike or a run and try to maintain that level of capacity is probably the closest thing you can do to supporting your climbing. And then do some specific strength training in the house. And you can come up with a pretty good cycle of 2 days a week of hangboard, 2 days a week of body weight training, and then, 5 days a week of general, aerobic capacity training. And I think that if people can kind of design that out and be conservative with how, hard they want to go on that, that's how we're gonna progress the best through this, because it's real hard to go, oh yeah, I'm gonna get better at my footwork or whatever while I'm locked in my apartment. So we need to look in terms of just keeping the general athlete in good enough fitness.
Okay. So what I took from that is we should think that running is good for climbing now. Yep. Okay.
No, no, it's actually right. It's not. We know it's not specific. We know it's not going to give you the specific, local forearm muscular endurance, but activity on any level that promotes the ability to uptake oxygen and keep your heart conditioned well, keep your muscles good at processing oxygen and utilizing fat. Very, very useful. Many of us are used to getting cardiovascular activity in the terms of like walking up to the crag with a backpack on. And those adaptations are expensive for your body to maintain. And so if we let even our general capacity for exercise drop off, that's very hard to nail back when you start getting back in shape for climbing. And so, yeah, like going for a walk around your town, going, you know, any amount of physical activity is going to be really useful. And especially, I think, emotionally and health-wise, those are two things that we don't really think about. We're always training. Well, I think, you know, maintaining cardiorespiratory fitness and mental health is just as important at this point.
Cool. I was totally joking, but that was a really great answer to that, to my dumb joke. Okay, Tom, what do you think about that? In general, what do you think people should be doing at home?
Well, I think, as Steve said, it's one of the things that's really important to realize is that most people go from this balance of where they put aside a certain part of their week where they might do some quite focused work where they're trying to make improvements. So kind of what we put in the training envelope. And then another part of the week will just be in the general practice, having fun, unstructured work. And that will go into that side of things. And what a lot of people will find themselves in now is they have all of that space is now suddenly in the sort of training envelope. And they feel like they can fit all of that activity in that time that they put aside previously in quite a split, balanced way just into training. And I think this is a really big mistake, especially as people are going to be, they might well tend to do it very quickly and kind of jump in too fast, too hard. So I think it's really good to try and break down and look at what you've previously done over, you know, the last 3 months, 6 months, last couple of years, and look at your kind of history of what you put into your body and try and replicate that as much as possible in this home environment. So if you were someone who did 1 to 2 days of training, and this is like focused work previously to the situation we're in now, do not suddenly try and put it up to 3, 4, 5 days of focused training. Try and mimic that. So keep that balance of focused training in your time at home. And if you then went out, say 2 days a week for fun, is try and look at other activities which mimic that as much as possible. So that might be working large muscle groups, doing generalized strength and conditioning, circuit training, going for a walk, bike ride, run, any of those things that we can do that keeps that balance, because ultimately your body won't be very happy if you flip things too quickly and you do it suddenly. And secondly, is it's really hard for motivation to do that. You can kind of pull it out of the bag for 1 week or 2 weeks when you really make massive changes, but some of us might be down there for 4 weeks, 8 weeks, maybe even longer in some countries. It's difficult to say. So I think we've got to take a little bit of a longer term view on this and actually build something which is realistic that we can do for a certain amount of time. We still come out of it motivated for the thing that we ultimately love, which is a bit of training, a bit of climbing, and a nice balanced mix.
All right, thanks. Kris, what do you have to say about it?
I would say number one, I think bouldering on your kitchen cabinets is a great alternative. But make sure you get video when those fail and post it on the Instagram.
Lots of injuries there, lots of injuries.
Yeah, no, don't do that at all. And I agree with Tom totally that you should just try to take your, what you were doing before and keep that same level, that same frequency, not ramp it up massively. And if you find yourself with all this free time that you're filling that free time with extra training, maybe consider finding a hobby that you're going to enjoy. Try to find something fun to do. Play with your kids, even watch Tiger King, even though everyone already has.
Okay. I kind of want to go into this training too much thing, because I think you guys are right. Like it's definitely people's tendencies to be like, well, normally I climb for a couple hours, 3 or 4 days a week. And then sometimes a couple days a week, I do a half hour to an hour of training on top of that, or it might be more or less than that. And so people are trying to fill all of that time with exercise or training. Can you guys tell me the pros and cons? Well, sorry, just tell me the cons of that first, and tell us why, if we're normally climbing for 2 hours, 3 or 4 days a week, why like hanging on the hangboard is not a good direct substitution for that. Steve, you want to start?
So I think it's really important to take a good look at what the loading cycle of your training is and how much time you spend at each of these intensities. And so, yeah, if you go to the climbing gym for 2 hours, normally you're like, oh, I climbed for 2 hours, but actually you're climbing for 5 minutes every 25 minutes or 5 minutes every 15 minutes. And it's probably at a fairly low load. And so if we look at it as a percentage of your maximum finger strength, you're not real close to that, even on hard climbs. And so what happens when we try to replace it minute for minute with hangboard training is by its very essence super high intensity. Even just hanging body weight is quite hard on the fingers, and it's the exact same loading like loading direction. If you're just hanging on a board, it's always like arms above the head, fingers in, these 8 or however many positions. And so it's really easy to overload the tissues. We're not going to overload your lungs. We're not going to overload your muscles probably, but we are probably going to overload your finger joints and your tendons. And then we're going to end up with an injury. And that might be a really, really stupid thing to come out of this time at home with. Like, oh yeah, that's when I really hurt my finger. Like, you want to hurt your fingers like sending your hardest route ever or something, not sitting in your kitchen. And so I think, like, going back, like Tom said, look at the last 3 to 6 months and go, this is how much I did of focused training. And then to break it down and say, how much time did I really spend hanging by my fingers? How much time did I spend, doing maximal, the other thing is this maximal antagonistic training. Like, people are going to go and I'm going to get really good at push-ups now, or I'm going to get, really super mobile shoulders. Well, you can only adapt so much. And once we've hit that adaptation threshold, anything over that point is just moving into that area of injury. And so let's do a variety of things that might help us. But then we've got to stop at a reasonable amount of time, and then we can start progressing that. But you've got to have an all new plan, like Tom's saying, to go, from where we are now to increase volume and intensity in the new style of training that you're doing. And you have to do it progressively and slowly. The other thing you can do is work on other aspects of your game, your mental game, your strategies and tactics. You can watch videos, learn beta, do all kinds of that sort of preparation as well. But definitely not trying to replace minute for minute climbing with the hangboard.
Okay, cool. Tom?
Yeah, I think the best example that I can think of like an actual scenario where someone was asking this directly was about, they said to me, right, I'm stuck. I really love climbing on a system board, like a 40 to 50 degree system board. And what I want to do is I want to replace my system board training for a dead hanging session. And I just want to swap that out. I was like, okay, well, what are you thinking? And they said, well, I want to just do the exercise and mimic the amount of load that I'm putting my forearms under. And I want to do it super high intensities. And I just want to do that on the fingerboard. So what I was thinking was, if I look at my system board session, I might spend 6 to 8 minutes of contact time on my system board. And that's my kind of session. So what I was going to do was I was going to do a 6 to 8 minute max hang session on my fingerboard and replicate that out. I was like, 6 to 8 minutes, 90 to 100%. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. And straight away, that was the first thing that kind of rang alarm bells, was this is exactly what you cannot do, or you're not going to get particularly good results from doing it. Because if you really look at it and analyze it, what you're doing on a system board, if you're trying to replace that, for example, is you're not operating at those 6 to 8 minutes and in that 90 to 100% range. Actually, if you really look at it, you might only do 1 to 2 moves each time you got that system board that are really high intensity. A lot of it was actually quite sub-maximal and down at maybe 70%, 75, 80%. So if you're going to start to try and like take things out and replicate them on a fingerboard, you've really got to try and break it down a bit more and be realistic about the kind of intensities that you're operating at when you do that climbing activity. So don't swap out, 8 minutes of system board training for 8 minutes of max hangs. go maybe 1 minute of max hang work in total in terms of like that, those intervals and time under tension, but break the other part down and do some repeaters. So some lower intensity work, and sort of combine those and add those together. That might be a more appropriate replica or substitution for that session. Of course, you also have to bear in mind the body positions and where your arms are above your head as well. So as Steve said, I think there's going to be some, depending on how long this goes on for, I think some people are going to find that if they spend huge amounts of time with their arm above their head doing this high intensity work, they may need to look at different arm, shoulder positions, body positions, and work out ways to train in a more balanced and appropriate way. So I think, you know, things like farmer's lifts, pinch block lifts, kettlebell work, dumbbell work in with hangboard. You can still do a lot of intense and moderately intense work, which I think is more balanced and will be better for people in the long run.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. And Kris, what do you think about this?
I mean, I think these guys have pretty much covered it. The one thing I would add is that if all you have is a hangboard and you're trying to add all of this extra time and extra training, you're going to burn out and lose motivation much faster, most likely, than your normal training would have. So while it's not a good idea physically to do it, I think it's not a good idea mentally and motivationally as well. So keeping it to that, you know, norm that you were on previously before all of this lockdown happened, I think is a much better idea.
Okay. You mentioned motivationally, and I want to pivot to motivation because it seems to be on a lot of people's minds. I've actually even been looking for ways to stay motivated. It's really easy to just be like, I'm exhausted emotionally from this pandemic and work and all of the things. All I want to do is watch TV. And so you guys work with people all the time. Please tell us, how are you recommending that people stay motivated? And we can start with you, Steve.
You know, it's real interesting. Like, I understand there's a certain level of like emotional cost to this whole thing, but this is so easy compared to any other eventuality. Like, you have to stay home and have full internet access, and you can order food. I mean, like, if you have some amount of perspective, the thing I would remind people is that we have been living in very, very easy times. Most people don't have to work very much for as much money as they make, or they did in the past. Everything in our lives was very, very easy. You know, we can have anything sent to our house on a moment's notice. And so to have things a little bit more difficult, I think it's good developmentally for all of us. The thing I would say about staying motivated to train is you should stay motivated to have that continuity of training, meaning like getting your heart rate up, breathing hard, making your fingers feel like you're a climber still. But in general, just trying to get something going that's gonna build a basic capacity for you fitness-wise. Then you can go ahead and plan out some hard workouts and things like that. But the main thing is to just make it a new habit. We had our old habit of going down the street to the climbing gym, going to the crag on the weekend, visiting Whole Foods, whatever it was. Your new habit is going to involve new things, and you need to start enforcing those, because habit becomes an anchor upon which you can reduce your stress. The more habits you have, the less energy you have to spend maintaining all these other things. And so if you always say like, yeah, I'm going to get out of bed, or, you know, at 7 a.m, and I'm going to exercise for an hour, it's very, very critical that you put that into your day, because otherwise it ends up being like this eternal sick day of like, I guess I'll eat a little something. I guess I'll go over here, watch some TV. And so our tendency is to be less active. Some of the reports right now are people are 1/4 to 1/3 as active as they were pre-quarantine. And they tend to eat badly. And so one of the really great things you could do now that's very, very easy is to dial in your eating. And so build a habit of eating well, build a habit of of training, and then you can build all the rest of the habits of your life around those things. You're not going to have your highest performance levels like the day you get back to the crag after this, but you want to come out of this being somewhat fit and somewhat healthy, rather than being somebody that's been, kept in a room for the last 8 months.
Okay. Yeah, I know for me, it's one of my biggest motivators is like, I don't want to suck really bad when I come out of this. I want to at least be able to get back to peak, performance pretty quickly. Okay. So Tom, what do you think about that? How are you telling your clients to stay motivated?
There's a few different things we try and sort of look at. One is I think it's really useful for most people to do a sort of a reality check and realize, and this is like a conversation you kind of have to just get going, is to get people to realize that if things like their personal safety, their health, or their uncertainty in life are really affected by anything at the moment, and everyone's on kind of a different part of the spectrum, it's a good conversation to have to say, if any of those three factors or all three in combination are significantly affected, you are going to struggle with motivation. It's really going to affect that. So be a little bit realistic about how much you're trying to go after some of those, higher end goals to do with climbing if you can't deal with your own health, or you can't deal with the money that you're bringing in every month. So you have to kind of just get people into that sort of self-care kindness cycle a little bit, just to be realistic, because there's no point in doing some amazing, fingerboarding regime or whatever it might be if you can't deal with money coming in the door. So we have to be realistic about that first of all. And then secondly is getting people to sit back and go, what were the core things that really motivated you as a climber? What got you going a year ago? What got you going 5 years ago? And do a check-in on that and really find out, like, what's right in the heart and what kind of gets you up every morning and kind of keeps that fire burning. Because if you can check in on that, it really kind of just keeps the stoke going. And it's nice to do that on occasions like this, because sometimes you can drift when there's so much kind of noise going on and everything feels so different every day. It's really hard to focus. And then lastly, the kind of other thing on top of that I'll do is say, right, what tools do you have? Let's not just battle against not having a gym, not having access to this, not having this partner that you normally climb with. Make a list of what things you do have and build your regime and what you can do around those things. Be realistic. Otherwise, you're just making your life a lot harder and you will get demotivated by that.
Great. Thanks, Tom. And Kris, what do you think about that?
I'll give you one of the specific things that I think has helped a lot of people. It's something I've used to motivate myself, and I see a lot of my clients and my friends and partners doing the same. We're all able to talk to each other, see each other's faces during this whole thing, which is sort of a, Jetsons sort of an idea. 15 years ago, we never imagined it. So you can still be at home and go through the guidebooks, talk to your partners, plan your next season. What projects do you have that line up with someone else's projects? Pay attention to the aspect when they're in the sun, when it's good for you to be on your project, when it's good for your partner to be on their project, and plan out the season as best you can. I think a lot of people miss that to begin with. So, and that gets me really psyched. That gets a lot of people really motivated. And like Tom alluded to, you don't necessarily have to be motivated. We're not going to totally suck after this. You're not going to lose nearly as much as you think you are. A little bit of training goes a long way. So if you're not super motivated, that's totally okay too.
Okay. Yeah, I think that it's really good for people to hear, like, kind of being given permission to not need to achieve huge things right now. And so kind of on the same topic of motivation is with some people, they have new responsibilities at home if they have children, especially. And you guys, Tom and Steve, have young kids. Kris, obviously you have a child, but she's older and doesn't live with you anymore. But for people out there who are now faced with homeschooling and possibly working from home, what advice do you have for them about time management and anything else about motivation to keep training?
Well, we always have had a lot of structure. My wife Ellen and I, with our coaching and training, have a phone call at this time. I have to do programming at this time, and so we each had a calendar that we worked from anyway. And it just took a couple of weeks of working to try to fit the kids' calendars in there too. The kids have assignments from their teachers. They have Zoom meetings with their teachers, and so finding a schedule and sharing one big calendar between our whole family has been really helpful. Like to look at what Sam's got to do and what our daughter Annabelle has to do, and then try to fit our work around that. Most of the things I'm doing right now are somewhat flexible. I have some scheduled meetings, but then a lot of my work is just like do it when I can. And so once you get a look at all of the calendar pieces, then we can start plugging that stuff in. One of the things that I've been doing the last couple of weeks is getting up an hour earlier than I normally do, and trying to hammer a lot of that work during that period. One of the things I'm real keen on is trying to continue to learn, and so I spend some time each day and developmental stuff. And so I'll spend maybe a half hour to an hour in the morning reading or taking courses, and then start into that work. But really fighting to make sure the kids have the time they need, and that we're nurturing them in that same way. It's sort of crazy for them. I mean, imagine being Sam is a 6th grader, and half of his normal day is spent with all of his friends. It's a really socially developmental time for him. And so we're trying to make sure he gets an hour or two a day sitting here just like we are on a Zoom meeting with some friend, and just talking about nothing. And so structuring all of that stuff is very, very much like planning your training or planning your work. But it now involves, for us, 4 people rather than just 1 or 2.
Okay. And Steve, when are you fitting training in, or are you?
I'm just too busy, so I'm not exercising at this time. No, that's actually interesting, because that's part of getting up early, and I'll do that. I usually will come. It was like I was telling Tom earlier. Ellen and I are the only 2 people that are coming to our gym right now, and so. Unlike most other people, I have way more than just a hangboard to train on. But so I'll come down here and work out on the bouldering wall or on the campus board, and I'll usually do that just on a somewhat regular schedule, about 3 days a week. And then Ellen will do those on the opposite days, and I'll be at home with the kids. And so, yeah, we just like I had told you last week when we talked, Neely, we just have the world's most expensive home gym right now. so we do get access to that. We make time for it every day.
Right. Okay, cool. That's good to hear. Tom?
So I have 2 daughters, one who's 5 and one who's 8. And they're both off school, and they now get homeschooled. And it was, I'd say, for the first 2 weeks, it was total well, I'm not gonna say no, that's probably doing my wife a disservice. It was total havoc in my head, but kind of quite organized in Kim's head. But time was really, really tricky, and I tend to work quite a long week. I do a lot of hours, and I also mix in a lot of climbing and training with that. So I'm not really I don't watch TV. I've never been to I don't think I've watched a film for years, or anything like that. So even at that point, I found in those 2 weeks, my time was so significantly impacted, because I was just kind of putting everything down and doing some homeschooling stuff, and actually kind of doing an English lesson and a science lesson, which was comedy in itself, because I failed on one of my 5-year-old's maths questions. I couldn't believe it. It was way harder than you think. I think they've advanced these days.
Nice.
I couldn't believe it. Yeah, so basically for the first 2 weeks, I actually did, for once, what I would tell my clients to do, which was, if your life is in that much disarray and everything's too hard and you don't actually have the time, just go easy on yourself. Don't try and train. And I did 0 for 2 weeks. And that, I only ever do that if I get injured, really. And even when I get injured, I'll be training some other part of the body. But I did nothing for 2 weeks. I didn't enjoy it, but I did go, you know what? If I'm going to try and train at 2:30 in the morning, that's going to suck. I'm just not going to do it to myself. So I went, it's not realistic, write it off. I'm just not going to do anything for 2 weeks. It is what it is. And then when I've come back to it and just got back into it this last week and things have kind of eased up a little bit, then I've just made sure that, again, do what I think a lot of people should do, is just make whatever tools and things that you want to do in the home, make them super accessible, so that if you need to do this kind of shuffle in and out of childcare and things like that, is, you know, make your fingerboard in a really, really easy place. Don't put it in I don't have my fingerboard in the cellar, for example, where all the cracks are. I have it next to the kitchen. And if you're going to do some weight stuff, just make it really easy to get hold of. Just don't make your life harder. That's what I tend to do.
That's good practical advice. Kris, do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, the only thing I would add is that, you know, a lot of us are stuck in a new situation with our spouses or, you know, housemates, whatever it might be. In my situation, I work from home and I'm usually here by myself all day. And now I have my wife, who's a social worker at the schools here in Lander, is at home and is doing Zoom meetings with her, you know, her colleagues as well as with students. So our schedules have clashed a little bit, and I've found myself getting frustrated that my normal schedule's been totally disrupted in that way. I also have my office manager, who was here staying with us for a little while, has gotten locked in with us as well. And I'm just driving her crazy trying to work 15 hours a day. So you have to also be, you know, just pay attention to what's going on with your housemates, your spouses, whoever it is, and give them the space and the time that they need as well.
Yeah, I think people are having to get real creative about space. I see my next door neighbor taking calls in his car in the driveway.
It's great.
Yeah. Okay, so I feel like we've covered a lot of the emotional parts of this. And I want to get to some of the nuts and bolts of this. So, Tom, I had asked all of you guys to give me some common questions from your audience. And one of them that you gave me was what to do at home if you're faced with scenarios where you have very little weight, dumbbells, discs, or kettlebells. Do you want to talk about that for the people who have very little equipment, what you're having them do?
Was that my question?
Yeah. Was it not? Maybe it was just, maybe I'm just giving you credit for something that wasn't yours.
Damn, why did I give myself a hard question? Kris? No, I've got it.
Okay.
Got it. Yeah, so that question was one that I think is quite relevant to lots of people, because I've been hearing about, like, people can't even get weights on eBay, and is it called Craigslist in the US?
Yeah.
Yep.
I think we have Gumtree in the UK. And I've been explaining to people that if you still want to do some work which you can't do heavily weighted, and you still want to have a strength stimulus, the one trick up your sleeve that I think a lot of people forget about is massively increasing the duration of each rep. So slowing the movement down, and you can still have a really good strength stimulus by massively slowing down that movement. So the example that would be is a pull-up. Is if you can do a pull-up really easily, and you can do 20 of them in a row, just try doing 3 pull-ups in a row and taking 15 seconds to do each of those pull-ups. It's really freaking hard. And you can do exactly the same with any of these planes of movement that we use in training. And it's just a really nice tool to use if you have no weights. And I've been telling quite a few people that to use if you get really stuck.
Okay. And can you give me an example of some of the workouts that you're having people do with very little equipment available?
Yeah, so with the generalized home workouts, what we try and do is do a split of upper and lower body general conditioning work. So large muscle groups, exploring a full range of movements. And then we'll also do a certain amount of weighted mobility work as well, because I'm keen to do a mixture of flexibility and mobility work, but I think it's really good to do some weighted work as well for the higher end climbers. Just works the muscles in a different manner. It's a little bit more motivating for some of the more elite climbers as well. And then lastly is we do a fair amount of fingerboard work down the lower end of the spectrum in terms of lower intensity. So stuff that's more akin to kind of regeneration work, arc, aero cap work down at 30, 35, 40% work. So sessions where you might be doing a very low intensity fingerboard session might be 25 kilos. So that's about 50 pounds of assistance on a rope and pulley setup attached to your harness, and a pulley going through the just underneath the pull-up or the fingerboard, sorry. This kind of intensity is low enough where if you hang on your fingerboard, you can typically take one hand off, so you can hang one arm quite easily. So really a lot of assistance. And then doing a repeaters exercise on anything like 5 on 5 off, 7 on 3 off, 10 on 2 off, any kind of variety of that. And using that within a range of grip positions as well. So not just, half crimping, use open 3, open 4, half crimp, pocket positions, and just creating plenty of variety.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Steve, same question. What are you telling in general to your clients to do that have minimal equipment, and what are some of the workouts specifically?
Yeah, I think the first thing we do is we start with what that person has available. It's like Tom mentioned a little bit earlier, like we don't want to start from a place of lack, like all the things that we don't have. We should start with the things that we do. And you might have a backpack that you could fill with books. You might have, a milk jug, all these different implements that you can use to add load. But we don't necessarily need to do that. I really do like the tempo style, slow pace, like Tom was mentioning. Also, isometrics are great to hold an isometric position, whether it's like holding a pull-up position at 90-degree elbow, the push-ups, held halfway, full squat, go down, hold the bottom position. All of those things give a good strength stimulus, and many of us are very weak in those positions, and so we get great gains from those without too much work. So playing with the speed of movement. The other end of the spectrum is to take your body weight movements and add explosiveness. I really like explosive push-ups, explosive pull-ups, to throw in some speed movement there. And you might not do these all in the same session. You may not even do them in the same phase, but you have a whole bunch of tools. And most of us are used to doing like a 1 second down, 1 second up push-up, or the same thing with our pull-ups. And when we start broadening the loading spectrum there, it opens up a lot of worlds to us. And so we can do a whole lot there. Integrative core work too, like hanging on the hangboard or onto some jugs and doing leg raises or front levers. Those, it's fabulous work to do. And it depends on really what that athlete is capable of, but we can progress all of those things at any athlete's level. And so no matter where you are strength wise, you should be able to look at your push-up ability and say like, oh, this would make this more difficult. This would make this easier. And then you can mess with those progressions and regressions. And so we do a fair amount of strength training, but like 2 to 3 days a week, with pretty short sessions, no more than about 30 minutes. And then on the hangboards, I think the lower intensity stuff is the ticket, and we're right in that same same parameters that Tom suggested, going, unloading things or going for very short sessions. I'm a big fan also of varying the volume of hangboard training throughout the week. So I would do maybe 2 rounds of a big circuit of repeaters on Monday, then more rounds on Wednesday, like 3 rounds of it. And then on your Friday, we would drop down to a very low volume of that. So there's some amount of variability in there. The main thing is to make sure that we're keeping that athlete uninjured and progressing slightly in their strength in whatever particular facet of the strength that we're working in. But to circle back around, it's really like start with what you've got and understand that the tools you have are going to be sufficient. You don't have to sit around and go like, well, I would work out if I had a campus board in my living room. It's more important to say like, oh yeah, I have this thing, here I go.
Okay. Do you think it matters what finger protocols people choose to do? It seems like, well, you just mentioned repeaters. Is that generally what you're having people do, or are you putting in max hangs?
Well, we use a lot of different loading protocols. It really depends on what the athlete is trying to get done. So repeaters are pretty good. They're pretty broad based, and so you can use those for a lot of things. Even though it's primarily like what you would call like a strength endurance stimulus, like the classic 7 seconds on, 3 seconds off. There's still good strength gains there. And the thing that's really important for people to understand is that with isometrics, anything over about 70% of your maximum is still going to provide a strength stimulus. And so we don't I think that banging your head against the max hang over and over and over, always trying to work above 95% is a recipe for injury. And it's also a recipe for staleness. And so cycling down to that 70% load and understanding that too is increasing your strength is really a positive there. And so the 7 seconds on, 3 seconds off, fine. 10 seconds on, 50 seconds off, also fine. And so, but the main thing I would say is whatever that athlete chooses, they should go through an entire cycle of that, do 8 to 12 progressed hangboard sessions in that mode, and then switch to a different stimulus. They're definitely, that would be, we're still in this world of like, what's the best hangboard protocol? And it would be like saying, what's the best weight training routine? I mean, there just isn't one. There's a ton of them, and it all depends on work to rest ratios and intensity of the loading.
Okay, thanks. Kris, going back to the original question, what do you generally recommend for people who have very little equipment, and what kind of workouts?
Well, I think these guys have really hit on it, but as a former gymnastics coach and gymnast, it was really rare that gymnasts back then used weight in their training at all. So, it's pretty clear if you look at a gymnast and the way they can move their body and how explosive they are, that you don't have to have heavy weights to get a good workout, to get a good strength or power stimulus. So there's almost always a progression of a body weight exercise that's going to be really hard for you. And there's a lot of ways to make those progressions harder. Like Tom and Steve have both talked about, manipulating the time spent in certain positions, or adding a cycled breath to the tough position of that body weight exercise, narrowing your base. There's all sorts of ways to make things harder. So explore those things. You can look all over the internet at gymnastics type movement or calisthenics and find really easy ways to come up with a hard body weight exercise. And we're programming really similar to what these guys are doing, varying the protocols every few weeks, or when it looks like someone is plateauing in what they're doing, and just switching it up to keep people interested, to keep people as motivated as we can, and to continue seeing gains.
Okay. I'm actually going to stay on you because I don't want you to feel like you're last every time.
I'm just here learning, so it's fine.
Okay. So I think a lot of people are out there wondering, how am I supposed to maintain my endurance through all of this? Kris, what do you think about that?
Well, I think number one, I would say, when is the next time you're going to need to access it? We know that endurance is a quality that's really easy to get back once you've lost a little. Steve mentioned that just general fitness is going to be really helpful. And if that's all you've got available right now, then we should be doing some of that. If you're not going to get back to the route that you're excited about, that you need that endurance for until the fall, then maybe you don't need to be so concerned about hanging on to that endurance right now. You can do really small amounts of it with this much lower intensity arc style, or just really low intensity hangboarding, taking a lot of weight off. You can do a session of that a week, maybe even once every other week, and have plenty of base for your endurance when you need to pick it back up down the road. So I would suggest to people to really examine whether you need the endurance right now. And if you don't, just be okay with not holding on to it at its peak.
All right. Steve, would you like to comment on endurance?
Yeah, I think that maintaining a general aerobic or cardiorespiratory capacity is the base of it, and this the honed up anaerobic power stuff that people really think of as their endurance for climbing is hard to hold on to anyway. So yeah, general activity, and looking in terms of, you could do a small calisthenic circuit that keeps your heart rate at a certain level to maintain some upper body endurance in that way. One of the main things we lose is the capillary beds in the muscles. Those are expensive to maintain, and so when we stop doing endurance activity with a certain muscle group, like our forearms, that tends to detrain pretty quickly. And so I think like Tom's got some great endurance workouts, all the way from basic aerobic capacity all the way up, that are very simple. And one of the things I learned a few years ago is just like the hangboard ladders, or like the campus board ladders, just going up and down with your feet on something. And you can do that on a hangboard too. And it's tedious, but having a little stimulus there would be really good. So you can put your feet on a chair, and then just move your hands around your hangboard to where you're unloading a lot of your body weight onto the chair. And then you can climb for maybe 2 minutes, then take a big recovery, climb for another 2 minutes, take a big recovery. The idea there is just getting some amount of low intensity loading onto those hands. But you're not going to want to do that for a super long time. So at a very, very reasonable level of maybe, once every week or once every 10 days, you can add this into your training just to try to maintain a little bit of that. And like Kris said, it's going to come back, and you're going to have more fun training stamina when you actually get to climb. That can be really demotivating to spend way too much time, especially doing stamina on a hangboard.
Yeah, for sure. Tom, anything to add?
I think, these guys covered most of it really. I think the only thing I'd probably just add into it that if you look at your endurance or aerobic fitness in a localized sense, you can kind of, in a broad sense, break it up into 3 parts. You've got enzyme activity, mitochondrial function, and capillarization, so delivery of oxygenated blood at a kind of localized level within the muscle. And so you have those 3 factors that you essentially are working when you do any kind of endurance workout. The half-life, so the loss, the training loss or the detraining that you have, which occurs in both the enzyme activity and the mitochondrial function in a muscle, is really fast, and that will go quickly, but it'll also come back quickly. The capillarization is the thing which I think has more value in trying to maintain. It takes a bit more time, but can also be maintained with very little detriment to other parts of your climbing training activity and your time use within the home environment. So I would say if I was going to put my time into one thing in this environment, it would be doing some kind of work that was going to maintain that capillary density, accessibility of oxygenated blood to both the fast twitch and slow twitch muscle fibers. So doing some work at a high intensity interval training and some lower intensity work. And that's what I put my money on in terms of endurance stuff, if you're going to do that.
Okay, great. I think that was a pretty thorough answer to that question. I'm going to move on to one of the last questions. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I think a lot of people are wondering if there's any way to train skills or movement or even body tension. And I'm going to start with you, Kris, on this. Do you think there's any way to do that at home?
Yeah, actually I do. I mean, there are a lot of components to skill and becoming better at any skill that don't involve necessarily doing that exact skill. We can really build body awareness by doing lots of different things. There's movement flows and all sorts of calisthenic things that you can practice and, you know, really spend time being intentional in those things instead of just going through the motions. You can do this with just general strength exercises as well. If you're really intentional and trying to be really aware of how your body's moving, what your tension is like, what muscles seem to be working the most in different parts of the movement, that's just going to build awareness that you can then apply later on onto the wall while you're climbing. And those things speed up your process quite a bit. If you're having a hard time with a move, if you've spent time in this place where you're really intentional, really aware, then you're going to be able to pick apart the tiny parts of that movement faster and be able to put them back together in the right way faster as well. So I think that as long as we're intentional and aware in whatever our training is, it's going to be helpful for skill down the road.
Okay. Steve, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think that trying to go like, oh man, I really want to keep this particular skill honed up is just going to end up in frustration. But yeah, you can develop, core tension really well through bodyweight progressions and things like that. You can also, like Kris was saying, keep the ability to move well by doing different like floor-based movements. There's the whole like ground-based martial arts practice that they do. There's several movements that, like, any martial arts, say Taekwondo or karate, they'll do movement-based things where they, they'll tumble and they'll crawl and they'll do all kinds of things to keep the motor pathways moving. One of the things that happens to people as they become adults is they don't train multi-directionally anymore. They don't play is really what's happening. We're always about like, oh, I'm going to go run, I'm going to ride my bike, I'm going to do 8 sets of this. And instead of moving somewhat randomly, which is kind of what climbing is like. And so doing things like, going out and playing soccer with your kids, or, walking on a balance beam, or, if you can still go to the park, doing those sorts of things, that's going to hold on to that a little bit. The other side of that is you're not going to lose that ability. Once you've learned the basic way to move your feet and do that sort of thing, move on rock or move on an artificial wall, that ability won't degrade as quickly as you think. I think most of our getting out of shape and getting away and sucking at climbing is more mental and emotional than it is physical. And you're going to ramp right back up into it. And I think that the main thing to keep in mind is, yeah, I need to keep strong and keep fit and whatever else. But, it's all going to come back. And people that have had a long-term injury or a long-term illness know this. You could be away from climbing for 6 months or 8 months, and then all of a sudden you're right back into it. I had elbow surgery maybe 12 years ago, And I thought, oh man, this is going to suck. It's all over for me. I'm going to be a road biker from here on out. But the elbow got better, and I was able to climb harder post-surgery than I ever did before it. And so even though I was off for maybe a year, it still came right back into it. And so I think that getting wrapped up in that is a little short-sighted.
Yeah. Okay. That's helpful. Tom, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think as Steve said, this stuff does come back, and if you've got the skill set there originally, you've already developed it, you will feel rusty when you come back. And for sure, some people seem to settle back into things really, really quickly. Others take longer. It just seems to be the way that we're made, and maybe it is going to be a function of our kind of history and how long we've been climbing for, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. So first of all, yeah, like basically don't panic. It will come back as soon as you come back into it. As much that, as Kris was saying earlier about like the dumb videos we see where people are climbing around their houses and doing all sorts of things, I actually think like just, yeah, basically playing around in your house and doing silly challenges and things that involve climbing muscles. Like I love all those stuff where you see people climbing around their partner and climbing under tables, and I've seen loads of people kind of traversing around the outside of their houses on brick edges and things. That's great stuff to do because it maintains that skill set. It's really motivating as well, because it is hard coming back from an injury of 3 to 6 months, and you come back into the game and you feel awful and you feel so wooden. It is hard to deal with that, and a lot of people struggle with it in terms of motivation. So perhaps just setting yourself up in a motivational sense, if you can do a little bit of maintenance. And lastly, I'd say is any exercises that you do at home in terms of a training sense, think about once you've mastered them, think about dropping the intensity on them, but making the skill required to execute them really well quite tricky. So it's good to put challenges within exercises themselves, because it challenges you mentally. And I think it's good to not end up becoming that climber who's just, the wooden plank that's really good at hanging off an edge, but, literally moves like a metal fork. It's no good for anyone. So you do want to actually still be quite a skillful, supple athlete human.
Can you give me an example of an exercise that you could put a lot of skill into?
Yeah, so an example of that would be, and I don't know if any of you guys have ever tried this. It's got me into trouble a few times, depending on what type of TheraBand you use, is attach 2 TheraBands to your fingerboard and put them pretty low down, so they're kind of maybe around knee level, and then you put a foot in each TheraBand, so it takes a load of assistance, but it has like some give in it, so you're almost like one of those baby bouncers that you put your kids in when they're really young in a doorway. And then when you weight it with your feet, you'll sort of move your body almost into a position like you're on a steep board, so maybe depending where you place it, 20 to 45 degrees, it feels like you're on a board. And then you can move your hands around that fingerboard, and it sort of slightly mimics climbing movement. There's some elements of it that feel familiar. It's quite interesting if you drop one foot out and you just do it 1 foot on, and that's a way that suddenly makes a very, very standard fingerboard sort of endurance workout where you put your feet on a solid object like a chair. But whereas if you do it on a movable object where things move around, it adds a skill element to it. I think you could probably, I've not tried it, so don't know if I want to recommend it, but you could probably do it on a yoga ball if it was moving around as well. Anyone else tried that?
Sounds dangerous.
No. I'm interested in trying it now, though.
You post the video first, and I'll watch.
All right. I have one last question for you guys, and this is just more of a cautionary question. I want to know what you guys think is too much for people to be doing right now. Like in terms of how many hangboard sessions and how many strength workouts per week. And I know this is very different for everybody, but in general, do you have any recommendations on that just to keep people from totally messing themselves up? Kris?
I mean, like you said, it's going to be very different depending on your training history and what level you were at prior to this. And I think we've said this already, but the level I think is too much is going over what you were doing previously. I think that if what you were doing before is working, then there's no reason to try to ramp it up. And for many of the reasons we've already covered, you're just setting yourself up for injury if you try to ramp up. So I would say anything beyond what you were doing before is likely too much at this point.
All right. Steve?
I think very often we get into a mindset of, how much can I take? How much can I possibly do and not quite get injured? And I think if the athlete can get into the mindset of what's the least I can do and still see a positive adaptation from this training, they're going to be a lot less likely to get injured and a lot more likely to be able to continue the cycle for a longer period. And that's a hard transition to make emotionally, but figure out about how strong your fingers are. You can go, there's great assessments of how to test your fingers, and go in, test and see how strong your fingers are on a certain edge. Do your training for 2 to 3 weeks. Did your fingers get stronger? Did they maintain? What was your goal? And if you were able to see a gain in finger strength on a particular protocol, you should never, ever, ever, ever add more volume to that until you're flat again. And the thing is adding more is very rarely the secret formula. And usually it's having better recovery and timing things better, or being smarter about your work to rest ratio within the workout. And so I would say, again, go back, can I still get my fingers stronger on 2 days a week on the fingerboard rather than 3? Can I do it at a slightly less load than I was doing before? Because we are looking at a long-term training cycle here. And the last thing you want to do is peak your finger strength, at the end of April and then still have nothing to do. And, then you have to go, go to a, online Zumba class or something.
Okay. Okay. Tom, anything to add?
I've always fancied one of those online Zumba classes.
Steve's doing them through his gym.
Sign me up.
Yeah, Tuesday and Thursday from 6 a.m. to midnight.
And I guess I can do it on a fingerboard at the same time, yeah?
Sure.
In answer to the question, it would be that number one is you use your training history to inform what you do when you're back at home. So don't try and overload it. I think it's quite a good way of looking at it, is thinking, what can I kind of get away with? And it's a good way to baseline what you would put into your training regime back at home. Because I think from the conversations I've had with lots of people, they've tended to go, oh, I've got to do so much now. I've lost everything. So now I need to be even more focused than before. But the reality is that you've got time. You can't just win the battle in 2 weeks of suddenly changing what you're doing at home. Just take it easy, sit back, just at least, first of all, get a couple of weeks under your belt in this new regime of what you're doing. So be really conservative just for a little bit at the start. And if you're recovering and you're making improvements in those exercises over your time at home, that's one good indication that you're recovering adequately. So you're training, but then you're resting adequately. And lastly is the one other thing that I always say is too much is just going at it hard all the time and never taking a break. So again, when you come to this training or this change where you're doing things at home, don't break away from your previous habits where you might have done 2 hard weeks of training and then had a rest week, or 3 hard weeks and had a rest week. Mimic that at home as well. Just because you're bored and you're going up the walls, don't break from that, because your body really loved that before. So copy it because it works. So stick to your rules.
Great. You guys are amazing at what you do. And I think I covered all of the questions that I wanted to get answered. Is there any burning question that you guys have that you want everybody to answer?
I saw a question on your Facebook post, Neely, that I think deserves a little bit of, or just a point. I think Lee Smith asked about it everybody was all trained up, and then this thing happened and we got sidelined. And I think that's a good time if you have a home wall, if you have a fingerboard, if you have whatever it is, come up with some performance challenges for yourself rather than continuing to train. Treat it like performance time, and get yourself motivated with a couple of boulder projects, or a couple of moving around your fingerboard projects, or just some movement flow project that you can get psyched about, and use that time to be tactical and to perform and to feel like a climber, or someone who's performing again. I think that's good for our psyche as well as for our bodies.
Cool. Basically just find new performance goals within the circumstances. Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Great. Where can everybody find you guys? Tom, can you just tell us where people can find you?
I don't want to give away my home address. Right? You can find me on Google and Lattice Training at Instagram.
Oh my God, you're the worst. Never mind. I'll tell people where they can find you. Steve?
I'm at Steve Bechtel on Instagram, and you can find all of our training information at climbstrong.com.
And Kris?
First, I'll say that I asked Tom the other day for a voice note for an episode I'm going to do, and it came with his home address attached to it. So I'll send that out to everybody. No, you can find me at Power Company Climbing on all the social medias, and at powercompanyclimbing.com on the interwebs.
Cool. All right. Thank you guys so much. Stay healthy and safe, and hopefully I'll see you under different circumstances soon.
Yeah. Thanks, Neely.
Thanks, Neely.
Thanks, Neely.